This is Willard Spiegelman, about whom there are two things to be said. The first one is that he is that increasingly rare thing, especially in this day of obscene academic specialization and professionalization, where Philistines are rewarded. Is this being recorded on tape? He's that rare thing, a man of letters, which to describe involves having to employ a series of not only but also constructions. So not only the distinguished scholar at SMU who's published a number of important books on contemporary American poetry and Romanticism, Princeton and Oxford University Press, and those things, but also the editor of an important and distinguished literary journal, the Southwest Review, of which I brought a copy and of which further examples are available here in the library, and to which, over the course of the years, he's really given his own personal imprint in terms of his taste and direction, and made it such a valuable organ for publication of aspiring writers, and also a public intellectual in writing on not only literature, but culture in general for places like the Wall Street Journal and general audiences like that, and also as an essayist, which is the hat he'll be wearing for us today, in publishing a number of very, very good essays in a book called Seven Pleasures, published by FSG, no dry as dust academic publisher there, if you please, and which is available to buy after this reading. And he will be reading one of his essays today. Essays, none dare call it creative nonfiction. So he is such an unusual thing now, a real man of letters, the kind of thing you'd expect in the days of T.S. Eliot and so forth. The second thing to say about him is he's a stylist, which means that if you pick up one of his academic books, from which you might expect only to get academic information, do you know what I mean, as in the majority of academic books that are published, what you will find is that you're gripped from the first sentence not only by the information that he has to impart about, say, the Romantic poets or about contemporary American poets, but also by his own personal literary style. Do you see what I mean? And his management of a paragraph word by word and sentence by sentence, which is itself a source of pleasure and has been to me for many years and will be for you as he reads for us today. Willard Spiegelman.
Thank you for coming. As Mr. Talbot was giving that introduction, I had two simultaneous reactions. The first was, who is he talking about? And the second, as I realized he was talking about me, well, three reactions. The second and third, as he was talking about me, I wanted to disappear under the floor. And the third was, let's hear more. So thank you for that. I'm going to read an essay, not a piece of creative nonfiction, as John said, but an essay in the spirit and the letter of Montaigne, who invented the essay in 1580, or thereabouts, the man who said that his only subject was himself, but who wrote, of course, about more than just himself. And I take that as a kind of role model. This is an essay which is not a memoir, though I appear in it, but it's also about other things. It's not a work of literary criticism, though literature appears in it as well. I shall read, I hope, for about 35 minutes or so, and then there will be time for questions. I apologize in advance for one potential misstep. You are not the right audience for this essay. My principal subject is nostalgia. Nostalgia is a feeling of old people, for old people. You are young, you are looking ahead. We are old, we are looking back. So if none of this resonates with you, I offer you a challenge and an invitation. Please get back in touch with me in another 40 years, okay? The title of the essay is Looking Back, or Proust Goes to the Country Club. And there are two epigraphs, which, if there were a blackboard here, I would write on the board for you. But they're short enough so that you can take them down, and I will come back to them later in the essay. The first, from a contemporary writer named David McGlynn, is, nostalgia is the balm of fear. And the second, from the late man of letters Peter de Vries is, "Nostalgia isn't what it used to be." As he lay dying of cancer in Boston, John Updike composed a sonnet series that ranks with his best work in verse and even prose. Clear-sighted, sober, but witty, unlike many deathbed works, these poems acknowledge feelings of wonder and gratitude. The poet looks at his surround in the hospital, the equipment, the noise, and the doctors and nurses, and he also takes a backward glance at his early years as a schoolboy in Pennsylvania. Here are the second and third sonnets in a sequence called Peggy Lutz, Fred Muth, 12-13-08. Dear friends of childhood, classmates, thank you, scant 100 of you, for providing a sufficiency of human types: beauty, bully, hanger-on, natural, twin, and fatso, all a writer needs, all there in Shillington, its trolley cars and little factories, cornfields and trees, leaf fires, snowflakes, pumpkins, valentines. To think of you brings tears less caustic than those the thought of death brings. Perhaps we meet our heaven at the start and not the end of life. Even then were tears and fears and struggle, but the town itself draped in plain glory the passing days. The town forgave me for existing. It included me in Christmas carols, songfests, though I sang poorly, at the Shillington, the local movie house. My father stood in back, too restless to sit, but everybody knew his name and mine. In turn, I knew my granddad and the overall town crew. I've written these before, these modest facts, but their meaning has no bottom in my mind. The fragments in their jiggled scope collide to form more sacred windows. I had to move to beautiful New England, its triple-deckers, whited churches, unplowed streets, to learn how drear and deadly life can be. Shillington gave Updike all he needed as an artist. Like Joyce, who fled Dublin but never truly escaped it, Updike had to get away to realize that he had met his heaven at the start of his life. His hometown nurtured the artist as a young man. For such sustenance, Updike was always grateful. These sonnets are a product of what I can only call intelligent, rational nostalgia, and they provoke a set of questions, both literary and personal. Why do some people look back and others refuse to? What are the pleasures of nostalgia? The word nostalgia itself has its etymology in the Greek nostos, meaning homecoming, and algia, pain, but the condition is more multifaceted, combined of equal parts of homesickness, self-indulgence, sentimentality, and an alertness to the genuine, confected, or non-existent pleasures of other times, other ages, and other places. In Updike, and many others of us, the pleasure, not the pain, predominates. The word, if not the condition, is modern. Nostalgia is coined in 1668 by Johannes Hofer as a translation of the German word Heimweh, homesickness, to describe the depression he witnessed among Swiss mercenaries longing to get home following service abroad. That its coinage coincides with the beginnings of the ages of Enlightenment and then of Romanticism suggests that words both come out of their historical circumstances and also affect subsequent conditions. They respond to cultural stimuli and then create new feelings or new articulations of older ones. There's a difference between two nostalgias, a restorative version, a longing for return to a favored place, and a reflective one, which is all about loss. Today, especially in post-World War II America, the original pain of nostalgia has often been replaced by a watered-down sense of the pleasures of self-indulgent trips down memory lane. I used to think I was the kind of person who relished, if not reveled in, nostalgia. I didn't necessarily long for the good old days, but I enjoyed thinking about them. Looking back gave pleasure. People who become historians must have a similar temperament. Now I'm not so sure about which direction I want to look toward, and I've begun to think about nostalgia itself, what it means, what it promises, and what it denies. My first epigraph, Nostalgia is the Balm of Fear, gives one explanation of nostalgia through a grammatical sleight of hand. Everything depends on whether we construe the phrase balm of fear as what a linguist would call a subjective or an objective genitive. An aside, think of the phrase the love of God. It has two meanings, okay? Either nostalgia is the medication that dissolves anxieties, the salve that rubs clean our wounds, or it is what fear itself has doled out to trick us into a momentary release from fear itself, a condition all the more toxic once it triumphs and overwhelms us. Either nostalgia placates or it deceives. My second epigraph, from Peter de Vries with his tongue only partly in cheek, reminds us that styles of remembering and forgetting always change, and that the good old days were never what we thought, that every presumed golden age longs for the one before it. Think of Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, with befuddled, myopic, aw shucks Owen Wilson borne back against the currents of time, learning, as only a naive American can, that all paradises are lost or that they never existed. The prototypical homesick person was Homer's Odysseus, cast up on Calypso's island and yearning for Ithaca. When we meet him in Book 5 of the Odyssey, he's gazing out at the sea, crying for wife and home, for a person and a place. Odysseus made it back, of course. So did Agamemnon, but with disastrous consequences. Ruth, in the Old Testament, is also a mythical exile, but as a literary figure, she is most touchingly rendered by Keats in the Ode to a Nightingale. The phrase, "Through the sad heart of Ruth, when sick for home, she stood in tears amid the alien corn." There is no biblical authority for this portrayal. Keats, born after the invention of the word, gave nostalgia a romantic meaning that the original Ruth would not have known, even in her desire for the land of her Moabite tribesmen. Exile and displacement are eternal. Nostalgia is a modern phenomenon, not a biblical one. Keats's Ruth has a romantic disease. Other nostalgias direct us not to places or even to people, except secondarily, but to a time, to the past. We long for our youth, which Robert Schumann depicted musically in his Kindersehnen, his piano suite, originally called Leichte Stücke, easy pieces. Schumann then changed his mind and his title when he realized that neither the pieces themselves nor the period to which they referred were as easy as we sometimes pretend. Scenes of childhood and adolescence invariably involve other people, especially as the past recedes. We think of those we shared our time with, especially as life itself becomes chillingly shorter with each passing day. Life gets shorter as it gets longer. We know what the end will be, but we don't know when we will reach it, or it us. We can sense the sands moving more swiftly through the hourglass. The past holds out, if not exactly promise, then at least the luxury of solace, but only if that past was a happy one. You can go home again, at least to a place, whether Ithaca or a childhood house, but you cannot go back in time except in accidental encounters, meeting somebody on the street, or those occasional moments of high-spirited jollity, planned but not enforced. I am thinking of class reunions. What impel, and you're all too young to have gone to one yet, but you will. What impels people to go to them, high school or college, or those famous gaudies celebrated by Dorothy Sayers and other clubbable Brits, or the more democratic, back-patting, old boy, old girl networking of an American version? I count myself among the guilty, or the lucky. At the 10th, old sores may still ooze, old animosities still simmer, and old flames burn. At the 25th, one has, ideally, reached maturity with a judicious combination of contentment and compromise. One vivacious younger friend told me that she compelled her husband, tall, dark, handsome, and very successful, to come with her to her 25th high school reunion because, as she put it, and I quote, "I had old scores to settle. I wanted to show them that I wasn't just a brain." This woman is a distinguished academic with impeccable feminist credentials, at least in theory, if not in practice. The trophy husband complied, not happily. At the 50th, no one cares or asks, "What are you?" They don't even give your partner the once-over. They ask instead, "How are you?" Voltaire wisely remarked that after 80, all contemporaries are friends. They know where they are going, and they are going there both alone and together. I was looking forward to my 50th high school reunion, but now I can't quite figure out why. Like Updike, I had always thought long and hard about classmates from early childhood and adolescence. I remembered most of them fondly, even the ones who may have been irksome at the time, when I was a know-it-all baby beatnik, an intellectual who resisted football games, pep rallies, anything that smacked of mindless conformity. These kids gave me a good part of my education. I did not know this at the time it was happening. Looking back can be instructive. A friend of mine, a writer 10 years my junior, had a similar feeling about her 40th reunion in central New Jersey. I'm quoting from her. "I got into the spirit myself, which I would never have done in high school, where not getting into the spirit of anything had been one of the salient aspects of my profile. Hers turned out to be more successful than mine. Does this say something about her or about it, or both? We'll never know. In any case, my event, like hers, had been impeccably organized by a bunch of stalwart classmates with energy, goodwill, and hope. There we were in suburban Philadelphia, 120 of the original 468 of us, plus an appropriate number of spouses and partners, those game enough to spend an evening with scores of people they had never met and would never see again. Wiser or less tolerant partners stayed home. "Not tonight, dear. Please go alone," I can hear them pleading or asserting. 15% of us had already died. Another 10% were unreachable for more mundane reasons. A bit fewer than 30% of us made it to the country club. Some of the enthusiastic organizers assured me that this is a good percentage for big public high schools. Only private schools or otherwise small and intimate ones do better. Who were we? We had as our common bond both age and a shared history. Growing up in suburban Philadelphia, the first post-war babies, we were the children of the greatest generation, the men and women who came of age during the Depression, who settled down in the Eisenhower years of what used to be thought complacent conformity, but that are now undergoing an upward revaluation, as is Eisenhower himself, when America could boast both a solid middle class and a steady growing economy. We came of age with television, the civil rights movement, early Elvis, and the incandescence of Kennedy's Camelot before the date that changed everything, November 22nd, 1963, and before Vietnam, hippies, and drugs. "Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive," said Wordsworth, looking back to a comparable period in his life before the idealism of the French Revolution turned bloody. "But," he goes on, "bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven." We, middle class, almost exclusively white, largely Jewish, could say the same thing. Even more than most young people, we had optimism on our side in the water we drank or the air we breathed. This same optimism must have accounted for a disproportionate percentage of Jewish classmates who helped to plan and who attended the reunion. We were the inheritors of the label Am HaSefer, the people of the book, and in most cases we were only 1 to 3 generations removed from immigrant status. Education, what it promised, what it meant, and what it delivered, was of the greatest importance to us, the secularized descendants of Old World ancestors, most of whom were more religious than we. It is no mere false nostalgia to say that, regardless of normal hormonal challenges and exertions, our coming of age was easy compared to what today's high school students undergo. Maybe not in Utah, but everywhere else. No metal detectors in the school doorways, no cyberbullying, and not too much of the old-fashioned physical kind either. The biggest misdemeanors, cutting class and smoking cigarettes in the bathrooms. That was the height and the depth of our depravity. At least those who showed up might agree with my recollections and assessments. People stay away from enforced collective nostalgia for many reasons, one of which is shame, or at least embarrassment for present failure, another of which is fear of reopening old wounds. Some old animosities had not healed. I had hoped that some people who loomed large in my imagination, the way Updike's Shillington schoolmates did in his, would take a personal invitation from me as an occasion to demonstrate fellow feeling. But apparently I did not mean as much to them as they did to me. They maintained sang-froid invisibility. Did the objects of my friendship and affections feel the same about me? I'll never know. One friend made it in from London. She spent most of her life abroad as a middle school teacher, and she took a characteristically clear-eyed view of the event. I quote, "The reunion taught me a lot. I learned that the people I disliked in high school, I still disliked, and the people I liked were still good. And I finally understood what happened in junior high, where I spent the rest of my life. And I learned that Sarah has not changed, and I missed Annie, and I can't imagine what life would have been like if we had stuck around the Philly burbs for the last 50 years. Most of my classmates had in fact stuck around. No surprise, most people still live within a radius of several zip codes from where they have always lived. Some of my contemporaries are across the Delaware River in southern New Jersey. A large number have moved to Florida. Very few are as far-flung as I in Texas and my European chum. Some people look back with distaste, if not disgust, putting the past way behind them, the way some distance themselves from scenes of childhood by decamping for the West Coast or even farther ports. And many people simply prefer not to look back. They're the ones who are moving on to the next thing, whatever that may be. They don't have to look back. They have something to look forward to, other than the obvious. Perhaps the most daring of us, however happy our adolescence may have been, do not require the balm provided by nostalgia. We all gathered, achievers, retirees, grandparents, the married, widowed, divorced, the always single, in a predictable array of bodies and outfits. We are doctors, lawyers, educators, business people, scientists, bankers, engineers, health spa owners, air conditioning repairmen, policemen, and factory workers, a well-filled cornucopia of middle-class American success. Physical health, financial security, and ample preservation prevailed among the attendees, with some exceptions. A cheerleader turned roly-poly, a star athlete confined to a wheelchair, another former Adonis walking with a cane in the early stages of Parkinson's disease. Are they the same or not the same as they once were? How do you feel when you confront life's depredations made visible? In the eye of the beholder, pity competes with schadenfreude. At the end of À la recherche du temps perdu, In Search of Lost Time, Proust's narrator Marcel attends a soirée at the home of the formidable Princesse de Guermantes, where he finds the relics of his past, the characters of the whole novel, the beauties now wizened, the strong weakened, the upright bent, the raven-haired gone white or bald. Of a woman he remembers as a young girl, he observes, this nose, this new nose of hers, he's not talking about plastic surgery, this new nose of hers opened up horizons of possibilities one would never have dared hope for. Kindness and tender affection, formerly out of the question, became possible with those cheeks. One could make clear to a person with that chin things one never would have thought attempting with the possessors of the previous one. Time takes away, but it also sustains. What Marcel thought had been lost, he has refound. The question is, what does it mean to recognize someone? Marcel notices what he calls the geology of a face, great phrase, with its erosions, deposits, and layers, a series of selves like the pentimenti of a painting. Some people, instantly recognizable, I'm quoting, as though in harmonious agreement with the season, adopted gray hair as their personal adornment for the autumn. The Duc de Guermantes shows his age, 83, relatively little, until he tries to stand up and totters on trembling limbs. And Marcel contemplates change and stasis, those two staples of every human life, how we remain the same under or over, beyond or in spite of evidence of difference. He realizes that one starts out with the idea, I'm quoting, that people have remained the same and one finds them old. But once one starts out with the idea that they are old, one finds them much as they used to be, not looking so badly after all. In other words, change your focus, readjust the mental image, and the former person, the old friend, reappears now, when old, as the same as when you knew him. Marcel says of one such rediscovery, "For me, who had known him at the threshold of life, he was still my young companion, a youth whose age I calculated from the age which I consciously assigned to myself, under the impression that I had not grown any older since that time." Everyone has versions of these revelations. Several years ago, I made a date to have breakfast with a friend, unseen for 40 years, when we both found ourselves in the same small New England town one summer weekend. Partners were not invited. It was to be the two of us, old high school cronies. As usual, I was early. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at the passing women. Could this one be Sue? Unlikely. What about that one? Too tall. Another one? Too blonde. Though, of course, that's a choice. And so it went until I was about to approach one less unlikely candidate, when suddenly I turned from right to left and my friend hove into view. "Hello, Sue," I said, grateful both for my astuteness and for her relative unchangingness. She looked like herself, just a little bit more so. But the opposite also happens. Someone came up to me at the reunion and said, "Remember me?" He wore no name tag. How could I remember this man who bore no resemblance to anyone I had ever seen? He had made an egregious faux pas which common sense could have prevented. I'm giving the young now a lesson in manners. Never assume that anyone ever knows who you are. The secret to polite inquiry, of course, is to make the first move and introduce, that is, reintroduce yourself. "Hi, Willard, I'm David Smith. Remember me?" To which the correct answer is, "David, certainly I remember you. You haven't changed. How are you?" Do not give the other person a chance to embarrass both himself and you. Take the initiative, but do not assume that all is the same, the time has not passed. The addressee picks up the challenge and maintains the fiction that you are hail fellows, well met, well recognized, and of good cheer. Let your viewer slowly examine the face and the body to attempt an act of archaeological recovery. Yes, there's something about the mouth, or the jaw, or the cock of the head, the voice, or even the dimple. Why, it's David, of course. Proust was again right when he observed that the beauty of an object is to be found behind the object, that of an idea in front of it. Some people seem to lose all of their bad qualities, others to heighten them. This is true of both body and, more infrequently, temperament or soul. Some people become nicer. The edge wears off. Some of the class clowns seemed less assertive. Humanity reasserts itself often when and where we might least expect it to do so. People become more themselves, but they also transform themselves. At the age of 21, young John Keats knew many truths, scientific, psychological, and emotional. Among them, this one of my favorite passages from Keats's great letters, which is a biological truth that he did not know at the time. Our bodies every 7 years are completely fresh material. 7 years ago, it was not this hand that clenched itself against Hammond, the friend of his. We are like the relict garments of a saint, the same and not the same. For the careful monks patch it, and still they show it for St. Anthony's shirt. This is the reason why men who had been bosom friends, on being separated for any number of years, afterwards meet coldly, neither of them knowing why. The fact is, they are both altered. Men who live together have a silent molding and influencing power over each other. They inter-assimulate. 'Tis an uneasy thought that in 7 years the same hands cannot greet each other again. But they can, and they do. Not the same, but also the same. Had Keats lived beyond 25, would he have accepted the truth of Yeats's great line in Among School Children, namely that we change without knowing it? We all look at ourselves every day in the mirror, washing, shaving, putting on makeup, and we always look the same to ourselves. But then we see a photograph or are in a dressing room in front of a mirror, and we are stopped in our tracks. When did I become old? That's the question. We are the same and not the same. Our reunion party was not aristocratic, not even grand. It was claustrophobic. No one could make an entrance as at the Guermantes. Hierarchy did not exist. After all, this was America. Did I achieve anything like an epiphany at the country club on that brisk, calm autumn evening? Did I learn anything? Was I struck dumb? Alas, no revelations, no confessions, no admissions of former passion, no apologies for slights or wrongs from the past. The event was as modestly pleasurable, even banal, as it could have been. That I probably won't see most of these people ever again, despite the lame jokes about our 75th reunion, neither saddened me nor made the shared pleasantries any sharper. Had I missed the event to begin with, I would have lost out on nothing except cordiality and some fine dancing to the music we grew up with. Anticipation of the event led to a subsequent letdown. I had so planned on an outpouring of fine feeling that I had set myself up for disappointment. Instead of the longed-for inundation came a modest wash of sentiments and the exquisite frustration of conversations nipped in the bud, which is always preferable to ones that go on too long. Thank goodness for the easy out. I think I'll have another drink. Or, oh, look, there's Diane, to keep alive what Wallace Stevens called the pleasures of merely circulating. Most of the old differences among us had melted away in favor of our acknowledgement of commonalities. We have led, everyone does, a generic life. Everyone had work and love, Freud's two great conditions, to talk about, although successes and failures alike both took a back seat to more mundane items. What's the weather like in Florida? How is your golf game? You have how many grandchildren? And only fleetingly more prodding or spiritual ones. Deep conversation, analysis, intimacy were in short supply. Fellow feeling and high spirits prevailed. These offered disappointments as well as pleasure. But what was I thinking? Did I really think that old obsessions would be restored, old flames burst out? Did I expect confessions, revelations, and admissions? None was forthcoming. The people I had crushes on 50 years ago did not show up. What would I have done had they appeared? I had wanted to have experiences that would have been worth replaying and reviewing, just as I had wanted to replay and review experiences from a half-century before, but nothing came forth. Wordsworth begins a poem with the phrase, "Such age, how beautiful." There's a poem called, too, the name is X'd out, to so-and-so in her 70th year. Only a special person could say this. By special, I do not mean merely a poet, but a poet of a certain age. Wordsworth is 57 when he writes this poem to the woman in her 70th year, who, like Wordsworth, born in 1770, is approaching, but not entirely close to the age of his addressee. This is what the future holds, if luck, genetics, and healthy living hold us together and sustain us. Wordsworth must have seen himself in the Countess of X, looking at his future and her present. Anyone over 50 knows the feeling. We see ourselves in others, and in the old especially, we find our mirrored selves. Even the gods become ghosts. As you get older, you become more sensitive to the ravages of age and more grateful for the occasional evidence that not everyone deteriorates terribly. Some people improve, or at least change interestingly. I'm not thinking of inner beauty, but of what the body offers to the eye of a beholder. The other day I talked to a man I know slightly. He's 6 years younger than I, gray-haired, straight-spined, beautiful. When I met him for the first time at a dinner party, I blurted out, "Have you ever been a model?" To which the answer was yes. Now, at 61, the bone structure is still there, the body is intact. Whatever indignities age has visited upon him, arthritis, knee replacement, do not show immediately. Instead, you find the traces of past beauty, the past recaptured or still in evidence, and also a deepening of that beauty. I think of Wordsworth in Tintern Abbey, the phrase, "For such loss I would believe abundant recompense." What form exactly does that recompense take? Yeats said, "Bodily decrepitude is wisdom." He spoke hopefully. Youthful beauty may be ignorant, but its appeal overwhelms. Fantasizing, one wants both the power of physical beauty and the wisdom of maturity. Can the two reside in one person? More important, what can you do to work with the hand nature has dealt you? My less than overwhelming experience, Proust Goes to the Country Club, came several months ahead of another trip, this one to Mexico, to visit friends for a weekend. The place and the company were congenial, the weather perfect, the getaway successful. Maybe because I was born 2 weeks premature, I have an almost constitutional capacity for earliness. I always get to airports well before I need to, eager for what will follow. I like airports almost as much as I like travel. Many friends call my taste for both the terminal and the plane inexplicable, if not bizarre, although it is the price one pays for the pleasures, whatever they may be, of the destination, the next place. To arrive somewhere, you must endure the voyage. I have never minded it. And then I realized, I look forward as much as backward. Something ahead always invites us. Which has greater vividness for you, the past or the future? I sit in an airport waiting room, eager. I sit on the plane itself in heightened anticipation. My antennae are on the alert. My body and mind are primed. Something is going to happen. In that waiting room and on that plane, no one belongs. We are all pilgrims together. There is no disappointment. Once in the air, we are literally suspended, going between. And this community of travelers, however temporary, is one of equals. There's no us, no them, no foreigners. No one belongs, and everyone does. No hierarchy. Even first-class passengers don't reach the goal any faster. Turbulence midair does not spare them. And if there's a delay, we are all delayed. Blandness and banality confer their own comfort. In a foreign country, you tend to be ill at ease in the unfamiliar. In the waiting room, you inhabit a state of betweenness, as you do in midair. In the waiting room, you're not even traveling. You are just waiting, recovering from where you have been, anticipating where you are heading, whether home or away from it. My big reunion flew by quickly, 4 hours of socializing. It was as pleasant as it was brief, if nothing special. It offered little in the way of lightning flashes or thunder rolls. And then it came to me. It was like life itself, miniaturized. Edna St. Vincent Millay, who knew about the speed at which, say, a candle burns, knew both the truth of our inevitable disappearance and the opposing urge not to give in. It's from her wonderful poem called Dirge Without Music. Down, 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 into the darkness of the grave, gently they go, the beautiful, the tender, the kind. Quietly they go, the intelligent, the witty, the brave. I know, but I do not approve, and I am not resigned. It all went by, and it continues to go by so very fast. Proust has it right in the last sentence of his novel. I quote, "Time itself is a place, extending boundlessly, giant-like, reaching back into the years, in which we can touch simultaneously epochs of our lives with countless intervening days between, so widely separated from one another in time. Life eventually becomes, for everyone, drear and deadly, as Updike put it, but for some, most, the lucky few, it offers gratification as well. Looking back becomes itself a source of such pleasure, even as looking forward as the end of life approaches becomes the opposite. Thank you. Are there any questions about nostalgia's yet to come from the young?
Did you interview classmates after the fact?
The question was, did I interview classmates after the fact? Interview would be too strong a word. I spoke to some of my co-participants to see whether they liked it, and I suspect that because I had such inflated hopes for it, I was more disappointed than any of them. I just don't know. I was really hoping for something fabulous. And it was banal, and I'm using that word in the sort of loosest, most neutral sense of it. Was it worth spending money and getting on a plane and going and living in a hotel for a weekend to do this? I got a piece of writing out of it. Yes? That's a question I can't quite answer, but every writer knows that the antennae are always open for the next inspiration, and one remains hopeful that some stimulation will jar one into creativity. So I suppose, maybe in some way thinking of that, if only unconsciously. It was a year ago, so I can't remember my intentions. But coming out of it, I said, damn, yes, this is going to be the substance of something. Anything else? Yes?
Did you know when you came out what you wanted to write about surrounding that?
The question is, when I came out, did I know what I was going to write? And the answer is yes and no. I knew I was going to write about this subject, and I was going to write about myself, and I was going to write about the phenomenon of encountering people, some of whom I had seen and been in touch with, some of whom I had not seen or been in touch with for, gulp, a half century. But as you also know, on the other hand, writing is an experiment and an adventure in a process. So I didn't know until I began setting pen to paper, metaphorical pen to paper, that I knew where I was going. So it was the journey, not the intention or the arrival, that was most interesting. Yes?
So I wonder, did this essay start for you as an image or as a narrative or as a theme?
Did this start as an image or a narrative or a theme? I think it was the last, because I was thinking about nostalgia. I was reading some essays by a friend, I can't call him a friend, somebody whose work I know but whom I've never met, he's older even than I am, and he was writing essays about nostalgia. And I thought, well, nostalgia, high school reunion, perfect perfect match right there. What will I think? But it was also true that I have always taken relish in thinking about the past. And some people do, and some people don't. I was just having an email with a student in Dallas yesterday who asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm giving this lecture, and it's on nostalgia, and it was prompted by my high school 50th reunion. So this is a boy who is, however old these people are, 19. He said, I can't even remember the names of the people I went to high school. And then he began making a list. He had some first names, some last names, some first and last together, and he got up to a total of 10. Well, I don't know whether I found that pathetic or I found it surprising in a neutral way. How could he not remember these people? Again, I was comparing myself to John Updike, to those wonderful last sonnets of his, where he remembers gratefully his childhood in the middle of nowhere near Reading, Pennsylvania, with 100 schoolmates. All a writer needs. His whole life was there in Shillington, Pennsylvania. And I felt the same way, even about the kids in high school who were not my best friends. I mean, I was the intellectual, I was the snob, I was the one who didn't go to pep rallies, and they were always rah-rah. And, my idea of a good time was sitting in a dark room, you'll pardon the expression, smoking cigarettes, which is what we did at that time, and being unhappy. But apparently I was right on schedule because I'm a perfectly happy adult, and I think that's what adolescence means. So I was grateful for all of these people for being part of this world, a suburban world, which really doesn't exist today because our life, I hate to say this, it seems like such a cliche. Well, maybe not here in Utah. It seems like such a cliche to talk about the easiness of life where there was no crime, there were no drugs, there was no nothing. There was just books.
I was thinking about what you said in the beginning about nostalgia is the balm of fear, and the two different ways that you could interpret that. And I was trying to think about if either of those interpretations was reflected in your essay, and I couldn't quite figure out if you agreed with either one of those interpretations. So do you agree with one of those, or do you take a third stance?
The question was about the epigraph from David McGlynn, nostalgia is the balm of fear, and whether I come down on one side or the other, preferring the objective or the subjective one. I think I come down on the fact that the more hopeful rendering of that. Nostalgia is what we use in order to give salve or some kind of comfort to our fears that otherwise would overwhelm us. We are afraid of the future. We are timid in the present. It was nice being young then. That was better than now. I mean, that's what nostalgia really does. And of course, we weren't better then, and it wasn't better then. But it's nice to think so. It gives a kind of rooting. Nostalgia is all about belonging. If you feel that you are a pilgrim and you are not where you are supposed to go, and you are not a religious person, you can look back and say, well, I belonged then. I belonged there. It was Norman Rockwell America. Life was easy. And that makes me more comfortable. It's the sustenance or the rock from which the rest of your life can proceed. It's like, is it better having a happy home life or an unhappy home life? Well, if you're a novelist, an unhappy home life can do very well, or a memoirist. Yes, somebody in the back had a hand up. I can't hear a word you're saying.
Do you ever find yourself revisiting the past and wanting to change something you did or getting caught up in it?
The question is, do you ever find yourself revisiting the past and wanting to change it?
Yeah.
Well, that's a fool's game, because the past is over. It's finished. It's kaput. No, this is the what if question. What if I had turned left instead of right? That path, the path less traveled. What if I had said this to her? What if I had made that decision? And that's a kind of parlor game. But I'm a very shallow and superficial person, and I tend not to think very deeply about things, especially things that are not within my control. And believe me, that's not in anybody's control. The witching hour has come. It's 1 minute to 1. Anybody who wishes to continue the conversation is free to do so, but not here, outside. Thank you very much. Bye.